way that the BIA functions. But part of the story here is definitely the personalities that are within those offices and how intractable those institutions can be. And there's some curious kind of strange things that I'd like to ask you about. The same solicitors who were involved in litigation in which Muwekma prevailed were the same solicitors that wrote the final determination denying Muwekma's existence. Does that seem appropriate or legal, in your opinion?
No, we actually, that was an argument in our lawsuit. We argued that the involvement of lawyers defending the agency in our first lawsuit should not be the same lawyers involved in preparing the final determination, the preliminary and then the final determination, that the tribe is entitled to, well, first the attorneys or the personnel within Interior, they should not be advocates against the tribe. They should be advocates for the tribe. That goes to the trust responsibility I'm just referencing. The Interior's obligation is to implement the United States federal or United States trust responsibility to Indian people of this country, and to oppose the tribe's claim for recognition in the litigation, and then also to oppose the claim for recognition in the evaluation of the criteria and the request for reaffirmation, I think was fundamentally unfair.
Anybody else?
Yeah, they got upset when they lost the first lawsuit. They were forced to expedite the petition, and the same people gave them a negative determination. I mean, that's not fair.
Well, I'm afraid it's bigger than that. It's not just being annoyed that I'm being asked to expedite a finding for one tribe and not the other, and somehow that's unfair, or I feel embarrassed because somehow my work is being attacked. There's also, you know, the sort of looming political threat that if you're the BIA and the Congress and Senate who approve your budget are not happy with what you're doing in the San Francisco Bay Area, right, your budget might get cut. So there's always this larger threat that the big money interests in real estate, in gaming, right, in economic development in Silicon Valley are looming out there as political donors to our elected officials. And you're right, Ken, if they don't hear from the rest of us who are not making you know, big donations to PACs, that's who they hear, right? And they need to hear from the rest of us that we're fed up with this, that we want justice, that we want honest, good government, and we want Muwekma to get justice. But if they don't hear from us, they hear from the moneyed interests who have lobbyists, right, who walk into their offices and tell them, hey, you know, the BIA really needs to slow walk this, or the BIA needs to, you know, I'm going to be really upset in the Senate Finance Committee if I find out that the BIA is working against my powerful constituents. So there's that pressure in the background. I mean, federal agency officials feel this pressure every year. Congress is threatening to cut the budget to meet the debt ceiling thing, right? If you're a federal official, you know this, right? And so you need friends in Congress, right, to appropriate the money that helps you pay your mortgage and send your kids to school. And so they feel personal pressure too, right, that comes from this political pressure, that comes from the just sort of overwhelming interest, you know, of dark money in our politics in this country. And you're right, I think you're right, Ken. The antidote to that is mass action, right? Because the tribe is never going to have enough money to fight that.
Right. Our voice matters. The people's voice, the constituents that vote our politicians in matter. And I believe that's what they're most afraid of, is their votes. Are they going to be voted in next year? But I keep telling them, and most recently I told Representative Ro-Khanna, we need leaders who represent the people, not politicians.
Anybody else?
Well, I was going to hopefully talk to Charlene about this afterwards in our next stage of conversation, but we were recently in Washington, D.C., and we were a delegation visiting different congressional offices and senators' offices, and it was very educational. And I was wondering if you would comment on what your takeaway was from our recent visit there.
I found it, we had our ups and downs, you know, since I've been visiting DC in January. And my takeaway, because I think our issue is, I've always said this, it's a nonpartisan issue. I think the Republicans and the Democrats need to care about doing the right thing and correcting a great mistake that's happened here in the Bay Area for Muwekma. And then not just Muwekma, there's other tribes, like throughout the history, what's happened and what you've mentioned, the other 100-something tribes that were removed to buy land for. They're out there too. But today, and what we're talking about is Muwekma's case, but they need to start correcting their mistakes and righting and correcting this injustice that's happening here in California. But being out there, I've noticed we had better reception about, you know, it from the Republican Party. Honestly, they never asked. What I've noticed is the Republican Party, the delegations that we met with, congressional delegations, never once did they ask myself is, would your tribe be willing to give up any of your sovereignty? The delegation that I met with here in our Bay Area, and I can't say they speak for the party because the Democratic Party supports Muwekma's restoration, but the 5 delegation here in our districts asked me in a meeting in January to give up a piece of our sovereignty. I was shocked that they asked me that because we've given up enough. We've had our land taken, our culture, our language, our people displaced. You know, my great-grandmother died from disease and left children orphaned. You know, a lot of that happened throughout, and this is a shallow history. This was very recent. It wasn't like 100 years ago, 200 years ago. This was very recent. So to hear our delegation ask me to give up a piece of my people's sovereignty, my children's rights to whatever they want to do on their lands, however they want to govern themselves on their lands, that is their right as a sovereign nation. And I saw that clear distinction on the Hill when we were there.
My impression of meeting with a lot of the congressional people and the senators was that we got a lot more opposition from people in California. For example, Senator Padilla staffers really gave us a short, quick meeting, didn't read the report Charlene submitted, even though they had it for 2 years. They discounted the social justice students that came with us. When they mentioned that next year there'll be voters, they just kind of scoffed at that, like they didn't care about these kids and their demand for justice. It was the California politicians, but Democrats outside of California seem to be supportive, right? So you have to look at what's influencing these few people. And again, it's not the Democratic Party, because all of them in the Bay Area have passed resolutions supporting the tribe's restoration, all the Democratic parties. So we know we have support from the Democratic Party. We know we have support from the Republican Party. It's those few people that are based in the Bay Area that have special interests lobbying them. That's the only conclusion I can come up with.
I think just to your point earlier, Charlene, is in the state delegation, you know, or the state legislature, it's more grassroots. Some of these guys are quite young, like Alex Lee. He's in his 20s, and he represents my district. But they all supported the state resolution, right? Yes. And so it's a disconnect between the local grassroots Democrats and the kind of moneyed interests of the federal politicians or the national politicians.
Right.
So over the summer there was a resolution, or could you talk a little bit about what happened over the summer with the California State Assembly? And
SJR 13.
Yes.
Well, that was last year. Dave Cortese, Senator Dave Cortese introduced SJR 13 back last year, March 7th. And everybody jumped on board. Alex Lee co-sponsored.
Can you describe what it
Oh,
is?
it was just, I'm sorry, the state resolution was just asking the state to support Muwekma's efforts for federal recognition. That it was very simple, and it wasn't giving us recognition, it was just supporting our effort. So this was introduced by our state and local delegation, Dave Cortese, Alex Lee, State Senator Bob Wilcox, he co-sponsored with Dave Cortese, and then there was, Ash Kalra signed on. We had Robert Rivas sign on. I think there was Lowe, but I have to say Rivas, once he got the pressure, because I was told that they're getting calls from lobbyists to not get the state. The state didn't have any business in the federal recognition process. No business in Indian, dealing with Indians, I guess. I don't know. It was strange. So anyway, Robert Rivas signed off because of the pressure he was receiving. So he signed himself off that bill. But it still moved ahead. Dave Cortese asked me, what would you like to do? I said, my council wants to move forward, and let's bring this out to the light. Let's see who comes out in opposition of our recognition, because they will be forced to, rear their ugly heads. And they did. They came out. We had to put a little pressure on it, because the bill moved over to the Government Organization Committee with Chairman Bill Dodd, but he wanted to stop it right there. He didn't want to hear any testimony or have a vote on the SJR 13. And let me remind you, Chairman Dodd, his district is in Grayton Rancheria's area. So he was getting pressure from from Grayton Rancheria and all the gaming tribes in California to not have this resolution move forward. But I stressed to Dave Cortese, we need to move this forward. We need to make sure this is heard and get a vote. And he did. He moved it forward, but Chairman Dodd decided to hear testimony but not have a vote on it. And the only testimony that was against our resolution was a few gaming tribes. But we did receive a letter from the tribes down south, the CIGNA, is that the California National Indian Gaming Association, and with the tribes down south all signed on to that letter opposing SJR 13.
Wow, so it's people far away are opposing.
Right.
So it's really not about Muwekma, it's not about the evidence, it's not about the story, it's not about continuity,
politics.
It's about something different here.
Yeah, it's
And
politics.
It was a very strange sort of situation where I guess there were a lot of people who were zooming in. It was still mostly the pandemic when this was taking place, and they allowed the comment period to go on really for a couple of hours. And you had one testimony after another in favor of recognition. There was a kind of palpable sense like, yeah, there's a lot of support for this. And then they turned around and said, well, we're tabling that. Right. So it was a kind of cynical sort of treatment of the tribe that left a really bad taste in the mouth, because it was so, they had no intention, but they were allowing people to talk.
Right.
And I wanted to also add that state recognition, if we look in the national framework, look beyond the state of California, that's something that occurs in many states in this country, and states that you might be surprised. I mean, certainly Connecticut and New York State have state recognition. So does Alabama. So does South Carolina. So does Virginia. So states in the South that typically are seen as conservative and perhaps anti-Native have procedures by which Native people are recognized, which in turn has been very important in their process of getting federal recognition. So it's not a good thing to be provincial just because we're in the great state of California, that we don't have to look outside to see that this is in fact in the national framework something that occurs. It occurs in many different states, and it is part of federal recognition.